Welcome to Power CEOs, the truth behind the business. I'm Jen Gaudet, your fearless host, investor, entrepreneur, and business strategist. Why are we here? Because I believe that iron sharpens iron. And when we share what's working in business and maybe some of what's not, we are all able to learn and grow. The result is a ripple effect that impacts not only ourselves and our families, but also our teams, their families, our communities, and our world. You're in for a treat today. We're going to dive into all things overcoming adversity, decision-making, and more with Vicki Hamilton, CEO and founder of VWH Consulting. Welcome to the show, Vicki.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Vicki, let's talk about adversity. It is hitting us. It has been hitting us in business. It's been hitting us in the pocketbook with inflation on the personal side. It is a constant, it seems, in the past 4 years of business, especially. Talk about adversity. How do we build the muscles to be able to overcome adversity before it happens?
You know, it's that's a very interesting concept. And I think that, the hardest thing is when it's not within your control. The adversity that happens within the market. I mean, starting back from when we talked about COVID to, how economy is happening, things that are going on that are not within our control. And the number one muscle you have to have is flexibility. You got to be able to adapt and have flexibility when you're moving forward, right? To those things that aren't in control. And you have to think about when you're planning. Something's going to happen this year. I have no idea what it is, but something's going to happen. Do I have any contingency? Do I have anything that can help me while I'm going through this process? And that's why having funds of savings, things that are put away for that rainy day can be helpful, because you never know what, when, where, or how. You got to be flexible to those things that are happening. And when they happen, you got to be willing to respond with speed, taking time to understand it, but respond with speed so that you're not losing a lot during that time period. And I think COVID was a great example of that.
Well, COVID was that was completely abnormal. None of us ever thought that we would be stuck in a house for, in Texas, it wasn't that long, it was a couple months, but for some people, it was literally well over a year. And so it really wasn't something that we had ever even anticipated or thought could possibly happen. And it was very disruptive, but we actually have these adversities all the time. I live in the Houston metro area. We've had 3 weather events in the last 2 months, and it's going to be a hurricane season. So crisis management starts with the contingency plan. And I really want to dial into this because you talked about flexibility and thinking about building that flexibility into your planning. So for those who are listening to this, and maybe you don't have a crisis management plan or you don't have a contingency plan for the unknown, how can they begin to build that contingency plan and then practice it? Because really it's a muscle. Adaptability and flexibility is a muscle. We have to practice it in order to rely on it when we need it. We rely on training when we're in stress. So how can they begin that process? Like, what does that look like?
This is, if it were so easy, everybody would do it. It's a very complex issue. And the complexity of it is that as you're trying to think about the potential of anything occurring. So you talked about weather. If you live in an area where there's a lot of weather things, you need to have weather contingencies. There's things that you begin to think about. I'm in an environment where this matters, right? You think about market trends, things that are happening within the business that you got to plan for that crisis. You think about what am I doing about data? What am I doing about security? What am I doing about, making sure that my assets are protected? All of these things are things that we begin to identify. But when I talk about contingencies, I think it's really important to say, well, how might I solve these, right? If something happens, what would I do? What phone calls would I make? Who would I partner with? Are those things set up in advance? It's always about that unknown insurance policy that we never know that we're going to need. but it's thinking through your process. It's thinking about what you do, where you live, your environment, things you have to consider within your business. So it is a muscle.
It really is. And what really comes to me is, and I know I'm going to get this because they're going to say, well, Jen, how do I plan for what I don't know? It really comes with time, and it comes from learning. Get a mentor, get a coach, get consultants. You have a couple of resources that have been on, you have a resource right in front of you, right? And so get with someone who's been around the block if you're new to entrepreneurship, and have these conversations, because it is that objective perspective that sometimes we need. And, Vicki, you've been on the show before. We've talked about the importance of all the different perspectives, but this is so incredibly important. And yes, before you say it, I know I hear all my viewers and listeners. I know what you're going to say, but nothing ever goes according to plan. I have the best plans and nothing. That's true. It happens in crisis too. It happens in crisis too. We may have a hurricane plan in Houston, and this is what's going to happen if it happens. But then the event is out of the ordinary. We experienced Harvey. It was like completely out of the ordinary. It shut everything down for much longer. It was like the big event. And so things were very disruptive. COVID is another example that was very disruptive, that even if we had contingency plans, no one planned for that. But because we went through the act of planning, those of us who didn't freak out, because we'd already at least thought through some potential crises. So when that one that we can't prepare for happens, we at least have a lot of the groundwork that we can then apply to that situation. So I really, really like that you talked about this. And I think the other thing that I really want to emphasize is we think about this when we're not in crisis. If you're doing amazing, we cannot rest on our laurels because we're successful. That's the most dangerous time in business. It's the time to think about what can unseat us. And I personally like SWOT analysis, but what are some of the other tools that you use, Vicki, and strategies when you have these setbacks or these unexpected incidents?
You talk about SWOT analysis. I do it every year. I think that's one of the most prevalent ones that are out there in terms of models that you can use. And I also do, in my circle, I have of my innovation, when we're talking about strategy, we play scenario games. We actually talk about different scenarios. Well, what if this scenario happened? What would we do? What would this scenario? So we actually take the opportunity to actually think outside of the box. And that does two things. One, it exercises that muscle. But two, it can make you think about innovation things you can get done. Things that maybe oh, you know what? It'd be cool if we could do that. It can start to talk about things you never considered before that could potentially be an opportunity. You never know. So we do a lot of scenario playing. And you mentioned about getting coaches. I think it is so important to read more, have coaches, follow industry trades, people who have done it before, been there, understand it, organizations, etc. And that's where important networking groups can come into play when you're working with other peers as well, because you may find out you have a partner in it.
You're absolutely right. And especially in times of crisis, it may be that we each, and I'm not going to speak for every business, but most businesses, all of the ones that I'm involved in, we have a crisis plan where what is our core thing that we must do in order to keep the business running? And we may pare way down our offerings, our products, our services, and having that network and knowing who else meets some of these other verticals, that may be a vertical that's an adjacent to us, that we sometimes do, but it's not our core of business, is so incredibly important. Because in crisis, when we each get to the core and we work together, everyone wins. If we have reduced resources because some of our team is out because there's a natural disaster and some people are impacted in other ways than others, we can get down to that core and we know who we're going to link arms with. And if we've already thought this through, then we've already got those JVs or those partnerships or affiliates or whatever in place, so we can subcontract or do what we need to do when the crisis happens, instead of having to struggle to get the paperwork together when all of a sudden we find ourselves with our pants down. So I love that you brought all this up, Vicki. What is the key aspect to motivating our team when we're in a challenging time or crisis?
Well, I think people who are going through that challenge, depending upon where they are emotionally, mentally, where things are happening and how it's affecting them personally. Because remember, that's what happens. That's what drives us, is what happens, what's going to do to us personally. So one of the things we have to do as leaders is listen. It's important that we have empathy. It's important that we really exercise the muscle of emotional intelligence. Extremely important in the time of crisis. Now, you're going to have some people who can get through a crisis and it's not a big deal. They can adjust better than others. But we've got to get to a point to where we understand so that we can move forward. Now, preparation of talking about these things ahead of time can always help during the time of when you're facing it, right? But to your point, you don't always know exactly what that's going to look like. But what you can do is let people know, look, we got things set up for certain things like, A, B, C, and D. So these are things that we're putting in place. If something else comes up, we're going to be flexible, adaptable, and we're going to move forward. I've got other contacts, whatever it may be, to put people's minds at ease that you work through it.
Absolutely. Listen, have empathy, exercise your emotional intelligence, and educate your team. Prepare them so that they're ready in any crisis. We do have to take a brief break, but we will be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Power CEOs, the truth behind the business. I'm here with Vicki Hamilton, and we have been talking about planning for adversity, how to exercise that muscle, how to have a plan, how to listen, have empathy, and exercise emotional intelligence in a crisis. And always, the more prepared that we are, the better things are. And so I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about decision making, because as entrepreneurs, as executives, it is so critically important that we make the right decision the first time and we have a speed and expedition decision making process. Otherwise, what happens with most entrepreneurs, or as they grow, they get caught in what we know as analysis paralysis. And that just slows things down, doesn't allow us to innovate and grow. And so I want to ask you, Vicki, because most times as entrepreneurs, we don't have all the data. We will never have every scenario planned when we need to make a decision. So when we have that high stakes decision staring us in the face, what is your approach? How do you make that high stakes decision, knowing that we have as much data as possible, but sometimes it's not a full picture?
This one is near and dear to my heart from the perspective that I am a data person, and all about metrics. But I'm also a research person. And I believe in staying, we talked about staying in touch with what's happening with your competitors in the market and what's happening in the industry, et cetera. So we all know you can only make the best decision with the amount of information that you provided. Sometimes we have the luxury of not having to make a quick decision, and we can take that time to explore, to find out, get data, information, research, comparative, talk to peers, all of that. But then there are times that you may have to make a decision and you don't have that luxury. And what you have to do is sit down and think about, I always think about what's the worst that can happen so I can prepare for the worst, so that if the better happens, I'm surprised, right? I'm better off for it, because I know I'm making a decision without everything. I've done as much as I physically possibly could do to make this decision, but I only have an hour to make it. I only have an hour and a half to make it. And I don't have everything in my forefront. So I always go with, okay, making this decision, if I do this, what's the worst that could happen? What's the worst that I'm going to have to plan for? And it's about risk tolerance. It's all about risk tolerance. And it's about how much risk am I willing to take when I make that decision, understanding I'm only doing the best I can with the data that I have. And I don't have the time to get all the information, but understanding what that worst scenario is. So what's my risk? What's my tolerance level?
I love it. I'm a big fan of what's the worst case scenario, what's the most likely, and what's the best case scenario. I never shoot for the best case. I always, if I can live with the worst case, and for me, like the worst case scenario is if I'm going to die. I'm just gonna be real. I have a high risk tolerance. I do a lot of investing. And so I'm very diversified and I have the luxury of that kind of a risk tolerance. I didn't have that 20 years ago. I was much more conservative because I didn't have that fallback. And so it's really important. I love that you talked about risk tolerance because we're all at different phases. We might be in startup phase. Well, guess what? In startup phase, it's all risk because startup is the riskiest time in business. So when we make these decisions, we want to make sure we have as much data as possible. So what is your risk tolerance? What is the information that we provide? And I really want to stress in a time crunch like that. I don't know how you feel about this, Vicki, but I always find that in that time crunch, like we're making the best decision possible, and sometimes it's the right decision, and sometimes it's close, and all we need is to kind of tweak what we're doing along the way. So just because we make that decision doesn't mean that it's wrong if things don't go exactly according to plan. We may be able to just make a 1-degree course correction and it can become the right decision over time. So speak a little to that and say we have to make a decision in the clutch. It's something's happening. We make a decision, we go, and we're like, oh, this isn't going the way I planned, but it's not the worst case scenario. I need to make a change. How much time do we give it? And how do we make that like little course correction so we can continue moving forward?
Well, I think it's all about the criticality of the decision you're making, right? And so if you get down the path and you're like, okay, this isn't right, you got to be adaptable to pivot. Let's pivot. Let's do what we have to do to pivot and make it a little bit better, and let's keep it going. And so it's a question that you have to look at all aspects to before you can really answer. But I think adaptability and flexibility becomes the key of being willing to pivot, right? I'm just going to pivot here. It's not the worst case. It's not what I thought. Some things happen. Let's pivot. And let's learn how we're going to pivot and the implication of that pivot so we can now change what our expectations are as well, right? So we understand what we need to do that's new. We understand what the implications could be of what's new so that in making that decision. So you don't always, it's so complex as you're doing it. It's very situational. But I think the core of the question as you're asking is truly about having an open mind to pivot when necessary, to reach the objective that is going to make it a little better, understanding you didn't hit it right 100% on the head when you did the first decision.
And the good news is a lot of times when we make that decision, if it's in a time of crisis, like let's just say we're locked down, we have to decide, okay, we're going to go virtual and this is how we're going to do it. And maybe it's not the best solution, but it was necessary at the time. And how are we going to navigate out of it? That next decision, that pivot, that small course correction versus throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that you can take time. So now let's talk about how do we ensure that our decisions are well informed and balanced when we maybe have the luxury of time so that we can make sure that if we're course correcting, we're getting ourselves on path and closer to that North Star where we're headed.
And when you have time, gives you time, when you have the luxury of time, you can do more of the research, the information, talking to peers, finding out what's happening, understand, other options that are out there, et cetera, when you have the ability to have time, when you're able to take the time to actually understand, potential solutions to whatever that, decision may be as you're moving forward with that. The other thing is I search out experts. I look at experts in the area and I'd like to have a coffee chat with you, like to talk to you about so-and-so, want to understand your perspectives. I know that you're an expert in this area, always doing things that's going to allow you to be the best informed, right? And that's why our networks are so important. I can't stress the importance of market, industry, peer networking so that you understand and have the ability to have others to talk to. Your personal, and I call them personal board of directors, not just your company directors, right? Company directors that are working for the company, but your personal board that you can go to and have those conversations that I'm really concerned about X, Y, and Z. I'm really thinking about, so you can get those perspectives as well. I think all of that is important. And then, of course, go to your business coach, talk to your business coach about what you're doing and get their perspectives because they may have some other ideas too.
Absolutely. And can we touch on unintended consequences? Because a lot of times when we make decisions, this is something that I have seen in my experience. I mean, I've worked with thousands of entrepreneurs, and I'm sure you have as well. In 14 years, that's very impressive. Like the unintended consequences of a decision that is made. A lot of times we think about best worst case scenario. If this works, it's going to be great, but we fail to consider the next unintended consequences. And one of the most, the best examples of this is like, let's think about environmental, right? Oh, everything is wind, 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 wind. Well, guess what? When that fails, or when that turbine fails, it's in a landfill and it doesn't degrade. Like there's always like the best intentions for our decision to move things forward, but we don't think a couple moves down and there's unintended consequences. So how do you mitigate those unintended consequences, whether you're having to make a speedy decision or you have the luxury of time?
You know, I wish there was a golden nugget. There isn't. From my perspective, it is when unintended things come about. First of all, you have to acknowledge it. I didn't think about that. I was nowhere close to what was happening. So how am I going to take a corrective action? That's after the fact. Beforehand, if you were really thinking about those things, it wouldn't have been unintended, right? You would have thought about them ahead of time and had a solution. So the challenge is a lot of times with those unintended things that are happening came because we didn't think through all of what we were doing. Now, did you get other perspectives? Did you look at the total picture? So even though it's after the fact, you can then begin to learn from that to be able to say what I can do differently. I have a saying that says, you don't fail. It's a first attempt in learning. But when you have that first attempt in learning, it's important to understand what are the corrective actions I can make so it doesn't happen again.
You know, and that's all about putting a process in place. It's about documenting, understanding what I did and didn't think about, and then knowing, okay, well, this is how this happened, and I'm going to put a process in place so that doesn't happen the next time. I really appreciate that. It's a first attempt at learning, and what do I need to do to make sure it doesn't happen again? Because you're absolutely right. Making mistakes is a part of business. It's something that we all experience, everyone, if anyone tells you they do not ever fail or have mistakes, they're lying. We're human. We make mistakes, especially when we're innovating. But it's what we do in that mistake with that learning that defines our success moving forward. Such sage advice. You guys, if you are looking and listening to this, check out Vicki on social media and her website. She has been a wealth of information so far. We do have to take a brief break, but we will be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Power CEOs, the truth behind the business. If you're just tuning in, you're going to want to go to nowmedia.tv, click on shows, pull down Power CEOs, and check the first part of this show, because we are dropping pure gold on all of you in every aspect. And now we're going to shift gears a little bit and bring back our resident expert in innovation in the aviation industry, Michael Duke. He is the founder and CEO of DBT Aero, and he is on a mission to decarbonize aviation, positively impacting billions of lives by flying people further, faster, and carrying more. Welcome back, Michael.
Thank you so much. Great to be here, Jen.
So, Michael, we've talked a lot in the past about the challenges and really the tight wire that you walk with new innovation and design in aircraft. And in today's world, we're increasingly aware of pollution, environmental impact, being good stewards of our planet. So let's talk about energy and sustainability a little bit. You guys redesigned aircraft. We can see it on your background. It's different. It looks different. Talk to me about how this has improved flight efficiency and stability, as well as what role these advanced aerodynamics play in reducing fuel consumption.
Thanks, Jen. The focus of our technology is reducing energy usage. So by eliminating drag, by making aircraft more efficient, we're able to use less energy. Now, when I say reducing drag, if you think about a single wire sticking out into an airflow, that actually creates more turbulence than a wing does. So you can have a wing that is much, much larger than the wire, but because of the way it interacts with the air, the wire is creating more turbulence. Our design is focused around reducing that turbulence, eliminating the wingtip vortices, the other things. We get rid of all of the things that stick out into the airflow and make everything smooth. As a result, there are several forces that come into play when an aircraft flies. You have lift, which is getting the plane up in the air. You have the forward momentum, the thrust, moving it forward, and part of that thrust is used to create the lift over the wing. You also have drag, which is slowing it down, and you have gravity, the weight that's pulling it down. Well, if we can eliminate the drag, then a lot more energy can be used to move the plane forward and to get it higher in the air. We can use less fuel, and that means more efficiency.
And so talk to me a little bit about how you guys have tested and are validating this new design. How do you assure that these improvements and these reductions in drag are indeed taking place? How do we know that it's reproducible and that we're having that desired impact?
Some things can be done in the computer. So there's certainly modeling, there's simulation, there's also wind tunnels, things like that can be done. But at the end of the day, when you build it and you fly it, and the results simply, they're just simply seen. So when we're flying the aircraft and it's flying faster than any aircraft of the same size, using less battery energy to attain that speed, you don't really have to do a whole lot more analysis. We can and we do, but at the end of the day, it's pretty simple when the thing just flies faster than anything else that size.
That makes perfect sense. And, we're all in business. We're about getting to where we want to go faster because time in the air is not as productive as time when we're in a meeting or we're face to face with our customers or our clients or our teams. And so talk to me a little bit about what future trends you see. Where is the aviation industry headed? And how can we as business leaders follow this and have an understanding of how we're going to get where we want to go with an eye on environmental sustainability and efficiency, as well as our time management?
Time management's a really interesting one for private aviation. As it turns out, private aviation is a lot about saving time and providing more useful time for the business executive. It's not uncommon for a business executive to bring along people on a flight simply so that they have meeting time while they're traveling. You can't do that when you're on a commercial flight. So that private aviation actually gives the executive and his team or somebody he's meeting with to have that private time when they otherwise would simply be traveling. I know of individuals who've actually met at the airport. They get on the airplane, the private jet together, conduct a meeting for an hour or two, and then the executive gets off, goes to the meeting that he was flying to, while the other executive that he was meeting with gets flown back to the original airport so he can continue with his day. So it is actually a way to provide more time for executives who are busy because they can conduct meetings while they travel. In terms of sustainability, there's a big push to eliminate private jets, particularly in Europe. A lot of angst over the private jets and the potential pollution that they create. If we think about many industries, for example, Taylor Swift, there was a recent incident where people were targeting her jet and trying to, paint it and cause some damage to her jet. And yet Taylor Swift buys twice the carbon offsets for every single flight. So is she polluting with her jet? Yes, but she's also then buying carbon credits, which is planting trees, doing all these other things to decarbonize. So she's making an effort to offset by a factor of 2x everything that she's doing in her jet. If she didn't have that jet, she would not be able to actually go to the concerts and provide the entertainment that people are looking for. If you look at sports, professional sports, we wouldn't have professional sports if we didn't have private jets. So it's not just business owners, it's really a whole lifestyle of being able to get people quickly around the world so that they can perform, play games, do whatever it is that they do for their profession. And by making this more sustainable, by reducing energy usage, we are then able to lower the carbon impact, so there's less offsets that are required. And as we move into future propulsion systems, then we'll have zero carbon, but that's a developing industry at this point. We're not quite there yet.
So not only are we effectively managing time as entrepreneurs, we have a captive audience for meetings. We can offset that with these revolutionary designs, such as what you guys are offering. Talk to me a little bit now about the future trends in aircraft design and aerodynamics as we embark on this sustainability permaculture first kind of mindset in both business and life.
A number of designs are being recycled from the past. Blended wing bodies, transonic truss-braced wings, delta wings, all kinds of fancy technical terms. There's also a number of designs that are coming out because of changes in propulsion. As people have moved to electric, we're starting to see designs that include lots of little motors, so they're distributing that propulsion across the wing. All of these are wonderful advancements. At the end of the day, we still think there's a fundamental change that's required, and that comes down to the double box tail, which is an entirely unique geometry. There are no winglets, wing tips, empennage tips. There's just all of those things that cause drag. We've removed them all. So if you're looking for an efficient aircraft, we believe this is the most efficient aircraft to begin with. Now you pair that with the future propulsion systems, whether it's battery electric, hydrogen fuel cell, hydrogen, other forms of hydrogen where you're burning it or cracking it, etc. Lots of different approaches. You combine those unique power plants, which are sustainable, with the most sustainable aircraft design that's out there, and now you have something that could meet the zero carbon goals. Without the combination of the two, I just don't think you're going to get there.
So really what you're doing is you're stacking the efficiencies on top of each other between optimizing the design and really redesigning things so that it makes sense, plus pairing it with the most efficient fuels that are going to get the job done, so that you can just have that stacked effect to reduce the carbon footprint really that's happening with our travel industry right now.
That's correct.
So talk to me a little bit, Michael, about how people can read about this, can learn about this. How can they start to educate themselves in this? Because as an entrepreneur who travels extensively, this is something that's in the forefront of our minds, is how can we be more responsible and make those right choices? So where can people go to learn more?
Certainly you can come to our website, dbt.aero, and there's some information there. We'll be releasing some more technical information as we move forward. There are a number of papers that have been written about the design, and so those are searchable on the internet as well. One of the things I would mention to business owners is there's a lot of hype in the industry, and be realistic. As we move forward, there is an evolution. We're not there yet, and you need to move forward just like you would not grab the coolest, latest forecast machine and design a manufacturing process around this thing that hasn't yet been built, and then bet your company on it. A lot of these technologies are evolving, and it's going to take a number of years for us to get there. Some of the climate activists are attacking the business jets. Frankly, a lot of these business owners are buying carbon credits. They understand the technology is evolving, and they're doing their part today to offset the credits as they move forward with new technologies. Things like sustainable aviation fuel, hydrogen, electric, etc. So as these new technologies come in, the aircraft will evolve and we will become more sustainable. So I would say, first off, you need to run your business. You need to keep your eye on the future. Keep an eye on DBT Aero and where we're going, because I think we'll have a nice business platform for a lot of these corporate owners. But you need to be realistic and understand that this is evolving and it will take time.
Absolutely. You guys heard it here first. We do have to take a break, but check out Michael's company, DBT Aero. We will be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Power CEOs, the truth behind the business. We're here with Michael Duke, the founder and CEO of DBT Aero. We're talking about decarbonizing aviation, positively impacting billions of lives by flying people further, faster, and carrying more. Welcome back, Michael.
Thank you very much, Jen.
So we've talked a lot about the new design, the aerodynamics of DBT's new aircraft. We've talked a lot about different technologies and propulsion systems that are evolving and in place. And so I want to really dive into the role of technology in decarbonizing aviation. Talk to me a little bit about how the technologies are driving that process. And what are the most promising technologies for reducing the carbon footprint in aviation?
There's near term and there's long term, and there's probably midterm. So in the shorter term, what we're seeing is an effort to make aircraft more efficient any way they can. 2 or 3% here, 1% there. All of these little things add up when you're looking at hundreds of thousands or millions of miles flown in any given year. So by incremental changes, it can add up. We're seeing sustainable aviation fuel as another option. That may take years to develop the quantity that is needed and the feedstocks that are needed. So again, it's something that we're seeing evolving, and as it grows over time, it could be one of those things that really helps. We're seeing batteries, and a number of battery technologies are evolving, making them lighter, making them more powerful. Again, the question is, how clean are they from this environmental standpoint? There's a lot of mining and other things that go into some of these unique technologies. And so while they may be very clean from the electricity standpoint, how do you get the electricity? How do you get the battery itself? Those may not be very clean for the environment. So there's a lot that needs to go into that as well. And it's evolving and growing. And then you move to hydrogen. Hydrogen is a little bit longer in the development cycle. But again, it may be one of those things that ultimately is the future for fuels for aviation. There's a number of things that are being addressed in hydrogen, and that could really be the long-term solution for aviation. Has great energy density, very lightweight, and it's very clean. So that could be it. At the end of the day, though, we still believe these new propulsion technologies need to be paired with an airframe geometry that is efficient. And so that is our focus, is the geometry, and we're going to continue to push the envelope and make sure that our geometry remains the most efficient in the world, and pair it with these other propulsion technologies as they get developed and advance.
Talk to me a little bit about how you're immediately impacting the decarbonization effort, because we know that we've talked about this in the past, you've already got the unmanned aircraft there, it's in the air, it's working. So talk to me about where you are now and where you're going and how you're going to be contributing to these decarbonization efforts.
Certainly, every flight that we take is a more sustainable flight. We're using less fuel with every flight. So whether it's electric energy or whether it's a fuel for additional range, and currently today we need a liquid fuel in order to get the range for some missions. The good news is, because of our design, you need much less fuel, up to half as much fuel. As a result, every single flight is a decarbonizing flight. We are using less less carbon, polluting less with every single flight. And the more we can move to flights that can be handled by batteries, again, we can fly further on the same battery charge, which allows us to handle more missions electrically than others might be able to do. So with every flight, we are trying to decarbonize and pollute less.
Let me ask a question that I know is going to come up because we're seeing this in the EV market, right? We're seeing that when it's cold, the battery doesn't last as long as, for example, those of us in the South, our coldest winter is most people's fall. And so there are some unique challenges to battery technology right now with regards to how rapidly that charge is depleted. So are you seeing the same in aviation?
Absolutely. As you go up in altitude, the atmosphere gets colder. And so we actually have an issue with those cold temperatures at every altitude level. One of the things that we're looking at is a hybrid electric propulsion system. And with that hybrid, we're able to use some of the heat that's generated from the liquid fuel, and we need a lot less liquid fuel than if we were just powering it by that liquid fuel. But by using some of that heat from the liquid fuel, we can warm up the environment that the batteries live in and then still take advantage of an electric motor as the final drive, which is the most efficient final drive.
And I'm going to ask the next question because we've seen this in energy conversations in the past, and sometimes that ignition to get that motor started is the least efficient part of the process. What are you guys doing anything to make that more efficient and effective so you don't have as much of a waste, I guess, in that initial ignition phase?
Yeah, that's an interesting question that we would love to address ourselves. Our focus is the airframe and the integration of the propulsion systems with our airframe. We are looking at some ways to do some interesting integration of other people's propulsion systems or pieces and parts and pulling them together. So that is something that we are looking at the industry to solve for us, because that's not really our expertise. So we keep our eyes out, try to find the very best, the most sustainable, but for us, it's about integrating other people's technology for propulsion with our amazing geometry and aircraft design.
And as CEOs and executives and entrepreneurs, we're always looking at partnerships, because if we try to tackle every single thing and every single technology, we're going to lose the race in business. So I think it's really fantastic that you brought in that you're partnering with other technology to make sure that you guys are maximally efficient. And so I just want to kind of wrap this up with a bow, because it's been really fascinating having this conversation about technology. We all in business see technology, and you had a short term, a midterm, and sort of a long term. How are we decarbonizing? Apply that to us as entrepreneurs when we look at short-term, midterm, and long-term business planning. What does that look like as we all move towards a more sustainable future?
I think that there certainly is a goal. You have to start with your goal, and that's the long-term goal. And then you start to look tactically, how are we going to get there? So as we look tactically, we need to understand that today, the best that most people can do is an existing business jet, an existing general aviation aircraft, an existing commercial airliner, and then carbon offsets. That's something we can do today, and we can have a positive impact on the environment and on society. As we move forward, we all then need to take a look at the technologies, be adaptable, which technologies are evolving more quickly, which ones not only technically are evolving quickly, but from an operational cost standpoint. Can it be manufactured in volume? Is it cost effective? Is the price point something that we can afford? And at what point do we switch? I remember being in IT many years ago and wishing that Apple would release some things that my friends were telling me they were working on in the lab. And it's like, why hasn't, Apple released this yet? They were waiting for the technology to get to a cost point that they felt it was reasonable for them to put it into their products. And until it met that cost hurdle, they just continued to work on it and try to get the cost down. So I think that's part of what we as business owners need to do, is follow the technology, understand where it's at in its maturity level, and then find that point in our roadmap that says, here's where we think that this will integrate, and here's where the next one will integrate. And we then put these pieces together in our roadmap and say, here's where we're going to make the change.
That was really impactful. I just want to emphasize that. Where is the technology? We might be looking at artificial intelligence. We may be looking at our business travel, anything that we're looking at. Where is the tech in the maturity point, and where does this integrate, and what's the next step? I think that's an excellent action step for everybody who's watching today. Also, if you are doing a lot of business travel, private jets, and offsetting with your buying those carbon offsets, such an amazing way for us to immediately impact in a positive way the environment. Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing with us your expertise. And how can people reach you if they would like to learn more?
Well, Jen, thank you for having me. Please come visit us at dbt.aero, and we look forward to connecting with you and beginning a discussion on how we can meet your needs and where you would like to see us go. We are always looking for input from the public, and look forward to hearing from all of you.
Thank you so much again for your expertise.
Thank you. Have a great day.
And you, yes, you. Unfortunately, all good things do come to an end, including this show. But the good news is you've got an action step. You've got a path forward. Take it, do it today, not tomorrow, not next week, so that you can move yourself, your business forward. And until then, we'll be here same time, same station next week. Go win today, win this week, and we'll see you next time.
This has been a Now Media Networks feature presentation. All rights reserved.